I sat in the back seat of that taxi, staring straight ahead, jaw tight, hands clenched in my lap, trying to keep it together. But inside, I was unraveling. The woman beside me was talking, laughing lightly, describing her secret lover who lived in a luxury high-rise in Brickell. She said he was powerful, discreet, married. She didn't know I was the husband. She didn't know I recognized the art studio she was gushing over, because I'd paid for it. She didn't know the designer throw pillow she described on his bed had been handpicked by my wife. My wife, the woman I'd spent 12 years loving, defending, sacrificing for. And now I was trapped in a moving car with her lover's other lover. I wanted to scream. Instead, I listened, watched her lips move until she gave the driver the address. My address. Our address. And that's when I froze. That's when the betrayal stopped being abstract and became flesh. Real. Humiliating. Cruel. And it was just the beginning. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. I wasn't supposed to be in that taxi. My car was in the shop. Sabine had insisted I Uber to the office. I almost rescheduled the investor meeting just to avoid it. But fate had other plans, and I didn't realize how cruelly poetic they were until halfway through the ride, when the woman seated beside me started talking about her lover. Casual, comfortable, confident in the anonymity of city transit, she spoke like we were old friends in a coffee shop. I responded with polite nods, distracted. But something in the rhythm of her voice pulled me in, a strange gravity. It was her description of his apartment. Glass walls, skyline view, a steel and marble wet bar I'd designed myself. My ears rang. She smiled, oblivious to the internal detonation she'd just caused, and went on. He's intense, quiet, married, which makes it a little dangerous. But the chemistry is... God, it's electric. Then she dropped the address. My address. That's when I froze. It didn't feel like anger. Not yet. It felt like being dragged underwater by something ancient and sharp. A humiliation so intimate it burned colder than fire. I kept my face neutral, my pulse screaming against my collar. She looked out the window, her breath fogging the glass. He says she doesn't really see him. I don't think she even knows he's slipping away. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was slipping too, into a realization I never imagined I'd have to live with. My wife, Sabine, wasn't just sleeping with someone else. She was orchestrating it with the elegance of a woman who had rehearsed this betrayal down to the detail. I'd been living in a house that hummed with secrets. By the time we pulled up to the high-rise, I let her step out first. I sat in the back seat for a few seconds longer, watching her buzz in, my keycard still on her lanyard. She disappeared into the building. The doorman didn't even blink. I got out and walked the long way around to enter through the garage. I didn't want her to see me, not yet. Upstairs, I didn't go into our penthouse. I slipped into the secondary apartment I sometimes used for remote meetings. It shared a wall with the primary suite, Sabine's creative studio, she called it, though the only thing she created lately were illusions. I leaned against the drywall, and through it I could hear laughter. Two voices, hers and the woman's. Muffled, intimate, vile. Sabine was cheating on me with another woman. No. Wait. A thought snapped clean across my mind like a bone. The woman in the taxi was not her lover. She was Bastion's. Bastion Wilde, my wife's collaborator, her inspiration, her partner in gallery ventures. The art curator who had become such a fixture in our lives, he might as well have had his own closet in our home. I pieced it together with agonizing clarity. The woman in the taxi was talking about Bastion, not me. And Sabine. Sabine was having an affair with Bastion too. He was playing both sides, and they were both married. The shock collapsed into something heavier, an ache so dense it numbed the edges of my awareness. I backed away from the wall, sat on the edge of the bed, and inhaled through my nose like I used to do in the middle of investor meetings that went south. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, thinking, remembering. Sabine and I had built a life that screamed perfection on the outside. Brickell penthouse, 2 beautiful kids, Sienna and Miles. She'd curated our image to be enviable, a modern Renaissance couple. She'd had my back when I took financial risks in the early days, or so I thought. But over the past few years, her gaze had drifted, first into empty spaces, then toward Bastion. I'd seen the signs. Her body stiffening when I walked into a room, her avoidance of eye contact, her mounting criticisms delivered with the polished edge of someone who'd already left emotionally. Still, I'd stayed grounded. For the children, for the vision we built, for the image of loyalty I wore like armor. I thought if I could just weather the storm, she'd come back. Now, sitting in the shadows of the guest suite, I understood something bone deep. She had never planned to come back. She was remodeling her life, and I was just one more piece of furniture to replace. I needed evidence. Proof. Something concrete to explain to myself why this wasn't paranoia or projection, but betrayal carved in marble. I called Marta, our longtime housekeeper. Her voice was instantly warm. "Marta," I said, keeping my voice level, "I need you to help me record what happens in the house when I'm not there. Quietly, discreetly, for the kids' sake." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Of course, Mr. Cole, I've seen too much already." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the guest suite and reviewed everything. The real estate documents Sabine recently requested power of attorney to sign. The gallery finances where joint accounts had begun to split into sub-accounts. And then, the security camera footage from a week ago. Sabine's keycard logged in at 2 a.m. Bastion's car in the valet log hours before dawn. It was more than enough. I made a copy, and then I backed it up. In the morning, I got the kids ready for school. Sienna clung to me a little tighter than usual. "Mommy forgot it was picture day," she said, pointing to her wrinkled dress. I smoothed her collar and whispered, "You look perfect." She smiled, but I could feel the doubt forming in her. Miles tugged at my sleeve, asking if I'd pick him up from soccer. I told him yes. I always told them yes, because when everything else around them started to crack, I wanted them to remember who stood still. Sabine breezed into the kitchen half an hour later, draped in silk, pretending nothing had changed. Her kiss on the cheek was an act, one I accepted, for now. "You're up early," she said, pouring her smoothie. "Had some things to catch up on," I replied. She smiled, then glanced at her phone, probably texting Bastion, or the woman from the taxi, or both. After the kids left, I stepped into my study and closed the door. I called Gareth Bloom, my attorney. He'd handled 3 of my major business acquisitions. He was discreet and ruthless. "I need a private consultation," I said. "Off the books. Family matter." He didn't hesitate. "When and where?" "Today, noon, somewhere neutral." We met at a quiet cafe in Coral Gables. I laid it all out, without embellishment, without rage, just the facts, the evidence, the footage, the money trail, the emotional toll. Gareth listened, then leaned back in his chair and said, "This doesn't end in a settlement. Not if you want to protect your kids. I want full custody, I said. And I want it without blood. I want peace. But I want it to be permanent. He nodded. We'll need witnesses, documentation, psychological profiles, a formal child welfare evaluation. You'll have it, I said. I left the cafe not feeling better, but clear. I had a strategy, and I was finally ready to execute. That night, Sabine didn't come home until 3 a.m. I heard the door, heard her heels. I didn't confront her. I just documented it. The next morning, she was all smiles. Overcompensating, making waffles, overusing pet names. The guilt was starting to show, but guilt never stopped her. Performance was Sabine's default setting. It's what made her so magnetic in public, so calculating in private. And so I played along. The loyal husband, the quiet partner, the man who didn't suspect a thing. She wouldn't see it coming. A week later, I requested a private session with Judge Eloise Kenter, an acquaintance from charity circles who owed Gareth a favor. She agreed to review the preliminary material. What she saw disturbed her enough to approve an emergency custody evaluation. The process had begun. Sabine thought she was dancing, but I had already built the trap floor beneath her. And as I tucked my kids in that night, Sienna asked, "Daddy, are you sad?" I hesitated, then kissed her forehead. "No, baby, I'm just getting stronger." She didn't understand it yet. But one day, she would. And when she did, I'd still be here. Present. Solid. Unshaken. The way fathers should be. The morning after Sabine's 3 a.m. return, everything about her demeanor was curated perfection. She hummed as she arranged fresh fruit on the counter, her movements crisp and choreographed like a lifestyle influencer's reel. She asked me if I wanted oat milk or almond in my coffee, like nothing was unraveling under her skin or under our roof. But I saw it now, all of it. The little tells, the overstated cheer, the light touch on my shoulder she hadn't given me in months. It was all part of the performance. I accepted the coffee. "Thanks," I said, calm. I smiled at her like a man who still believed. Let her think the fog was still thick over my eyes. Let her keep rehearsing her betrayal. "I was thinking," she said, leaning against the marble island, "maybe we should host a dinner next weekend. Just something small, intimate, for the gallery crowd." That meant Bastian, and maybe the woman from the taxi, maybe even others, more players in their glittering deception. "Sounds good," I said, sipping. "We could use some laughter in the house." She smiled, eyes flicking to mine, trying to gauge whether I meant it. I did, just not for the reasons she assumed. That day, I initiated the next step. While she was at her so-called studio, I met Gareth in the office suite we kept off the main street, above an old Cuban tailor shop. We had created this space during my first major equity buyout. Neutral ground, minimal digital footprint. "I need the timeline expedited," I said. "Custody, asset separation, and the forensic accounting." "You'll need to stay 2 steps ahead emotionally," Gareth warned. "She's slippery. And Bastian? He's another level of manipulation altogether. Remember, they're used to playing in shadows. Your only advantage is that you've already seen the light." I handed him the newest footage from Marta. Sabine bringing Bastian into our home while the kids were away, kissing him in the entryway, laughing, pouring wine. The timestamp was 3:27 p.m., a weekday, no ambiguity, no alibi. Gareth's eyes narrowed. "This alone, this will cost her custody." I nodded. "I want it clean, no media noise, no social backlash that hits the kids. We do this like I handle business, silent, surgical, final." "Understood." I returned home before Sabine. I had dinner ready, music playing, the kids doing homework at the table. A picture-perfect husband, again. But my insides were stone. Wow, she said as she walked in. This is a surprise. Thought we could all use a little grounding, I replied. We ate together. Miles told a story about a bee chasing his soccer ball. Sienna corrected him, saying it wasn't a bee but a yellow leaf. Sabine laughed too loudly at all the right moments. Later that night, once the kids were asleep, Sabine wandered into my home office. She leaned against the doorway in silk. You've been distant lately, she said softly. Is something wrong? I looked up from my screen, keeping my breathing even. Just work, I replied. Lot of moving parts right now. She crossed the room and placed a hand on my shoulder. You know, I miss us. Maybe we could try something new. Reconnect? A week ago, I might have clung to that lifeline. But now I saw it for what it was. Deflection. Damage control. I turned to face her. We will, when things settle down. She smiled, but I could see the flicker of suspicion in her eyes. Something about my stillness unnerved her. That night, she didn't crawl into bed next to me. She stayed in her studio, likely texting Bastion. 2 days later, I took Sienna out for lunch, just the two of us. It was a promise I'd made weeks ago. But now, the moment carried more weight. I needed her to feel safe, heard, grounded in me. We sat on the outdoor terrace of a small bistro tucked between two towers. Is everything okay with Mommy? She asked, halfway through her grilled cheese. I looked her in the eye. Why do you ask? She's been weird, like nice, but not really, you know? I know exactly what you mean, I said gently. And yes, there are things going on, grown-up things. But you and Miles are safe. I promise. She nodded, chewing slowly, watching a pigeon hop between tables. You're always here, she said. Even when you're quiet, you're still here. That sentence gutted me more than anything Sabine had done. Because Sienna could already sense absence, she could feel presence, and she had chosen me as the constant. That weekend, the dinner party Sabine planned took shape. The guest list included Bastion, 2 gallery investors, and a few socialites I recognized more from hashtags than conversations. I let it happen. Gareth suggested I allow one last display before we filed the motion. The night of the party, the penthouse glowed with warm lighting and the scent of expensive catering. Sabine wore a backless black gown. Bastion arrived precisely at 8:15, kissed her cheek for just a beat too long, and handed her a bottle of French wine. I shook his hand like I'd done dozens of times before. The skin contact now felt clinical. Beneath the charm, I saw it, his calculation, his quiet entitlement. He thought he was untouchable. Sabine played hostess perfectly, her laughter like a siren in a house built on lies. I monitored every interaction, memorized every touch, every gaze. Gareth had secured a private investigator to document the event discreetly. Everything was evidence now. Midway through dinner, Bastion toasted, "To clarity and bold steps." Sabine smiled at him. "And to freedom, whatever form it takes." The guests clapped, oblivious to the undercurrent. I sipped my wine and watched their secret burn in plain sight. After dessert, I pulled Bastion aside under the guise of discussing a potential gallery partnership. "You ever think about what loyalty really means?" I asked. He blinked, caught off guard. "In what context?" "In all contexts," I said calmly. "Friendship, family, love." He chuckled. "Sounds like a late-night philosophy session." "No," I said, stepping closer. "It's a question, one you'll need to answer soon, and not to me." His smile faltered. He didn't respond. I let the silence settle before I walked away. That night, I slept in the guest suite again. Sabine didn't question it. She just watched me, a hint of confusion in her eyes. The performance was starting to fray. The next morning, Gareth called. "We're ready. All documents are finalized. Custody motion, financial protections, asset freezes, and your statement of intent." I took a deep breath. File it. Quietly. Let her find out the way I found out. And that's exactly what we did. Sabine was served 2 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, while at a board meeting for one of her gallery acquisitions. The messenger handed her the envelope and walked away. No scene. No warning. She didn't call me that night. Instead, she came home late, stormed into the kitchen, slammed the folder on the counter, and hissed, "What is this?" I didn't flinch. "It's what you built. I'm just giving it structure." "You're blindsiding me?" "No, Sabine. You did that. When you let him into our home, into our bed, while our kids slept down the hall." Her face twisted. "You think you're the victim?" "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm the father, and I won't let them grow up thinking this is love." She stared at me, breathing hard. "You'll ruin me. You ruined yourself. I'm just protecting what matters." She stormed out. Bastian didn't show up that night. I think they both realized the stage had collapsed. Over the next week, I kept life normal for the kids. School drop-offs, dinner, bedtime stories. But behind the scenes, Gareth and I prepared for the hearing. Alaric, Bastian's husband, agreed to testify. Turns out he'd known about the affair for months, but hadn't spoken out. Until now. "Bastian left me emotionally years ago," he said in a deposition. "But what he's done to Jackson's family, that crossed a line." Marta submitted her statement too, including her knowledge of Sabine's late-night visits and inappropriate conduct during the children's absence. It was all building, quietly, powerfully. I started sleeping again. Not long, but deep, like a man who knew he was finally standing in truth. Sienna stopped asking if Mommy was okay. Miles began drawing pictures of our weekend hikes again. We were healing, slowly, steadily. And Sabine, she'd been served, exposed, and now she'd have to stand in court and watch everything she'd constructed with illusion collapse under the weight of truth. Because I wasn't the man she betrayed anymore. I was the man rebuilding something better, without her. The hearing date had been set. April 23rd, 2025. A month away. Just enough time for Sabine to squirm and Bastian to fade from public view, hoping the fallout wouldn't reach his curated social bubble. But I wasn't after tabloid explosions or scandalous exposés. I was after precision, after truth, after my children's stability. The morning after the filing, Sabine went radio silent. Not a word to me outside of the mechanical exchanges around the children. She started sleeping in the studio full-time again. I let her. Sienna and Miles, however, clung to our nightly routines like life rafts, book reading, teeth brushing, lights out with quiet talks about nothing and everything. Sabine knew the walls were closing in, but she didn't know just how airtight I'd made the room. 3 days after the papers were served, she attempted a counterstrike. She invited me to breakfast. I met her at an upscale rooftop cafe in Coconut Grove, where the waiters knew her name and poured her tea before she asked. She wore white, clean, pristine, like she was auditioning for innocence. "I think we should talk," she said, placing her phone face down. "Talk or perform damage control?" I asked, evenly. She hesitated. "You blindsided me, Jackson." "No, Sabine. I mirrored you. The only difference is, I documented it." She shifted in her seat. "Do you really think this is good for the kids? Dragging us through court?" I smiled. "You already dragged us through betrayal. Court is just the cleanup." She bit her lip. Her posture tensed. "You know how this plays publicly. If this becomes messy, it won't. unless you make it messy. You'd weaponize my mistakes? I leaned in. I didn't weaponize anything. I preserved evidence. You handed me the ammunition. Her eyes narrowed, the mask slipping. I underestimated you, she finally said. You did. I stood and left before she could salvage the performance. She was used to people chasing her down, giving her space to rewrite the narrative. But not this time. This time, the script was locked. Back at home, Gareth called with an update. Marta's statement is strong. So is Alaric's. Bastian's got his hands full. His marriage is dissolving in real time. And the finances? I asked. Your accounts are clean. But hers? He whistled. Let's just say the studio wasn't just for painting. She's funneled nearly $130K into undisclosed accounts since late last year. Most of it traced back to a shared shell entity she formed with Bastian. That's asset fraud, Jax. I exhaled. Presented at the hearing. You sure? That could devastate her. She already devastated herself. I'm just turning the lights on. The week before the hearing, Sabine tried again. This time, she didn't bother with pretense. She came to me while I was helping Miles with his school project, a poster board timeline of lunar eclipses. She waited until he ran off to grab glue sticks, then said quietly, "If you pursue full custody, I'll fight you." I looked up. You were never fighting for us, just against losing control. Her eyes shimmered. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. You shut down long before Bastian. And instead of speaking up, you opened your legs for someone who pretended to be my friend. She flinched. I made mistakes, she whispered. And now you live with the consequences. She left the room, slamming the door so hard the picture frame beside the bookshelf tilted. I didn't fix it. The day of the hearing arrived. I wore a navy suit. Simple, tailored, silent power. Gareth met me on the courthouse steps. Sabine was already inside with her attorney, a sharp-jawed woman in beige who seemed more concerned with optics than facts. The courtroom was small, high-ceilinged, and painfully well-lit. The judge, an older black woman with gray coils and no time for theatrics, called order quickly. Sabine sat beside her counsel, eyes downcast. Bastian wasn't in the room. Gareth opened with our evidence. Marta's recordings, timestamps, photos, financial records, and Alaric's statement. When the judge asked Sabine's counsel if they intended to challenge the adultery, she answered, "We acknowledge the inappropriate relationship but assert it bears no weight on maternal fitness." The judge frowned. Mrs. Marcellus Wynne used shared marital funds to finance this extramarital relationship, correct? Her attorney nodded. It was a lapse in judgment. Gareth stood. More than a lapse, Your Honor. It was sustained deceit, and it involved exposing the children, especially during overnights with the affair partner present. Sabine's eyes darted toward me. I didn't blink. Then Gareth dropped the second hammer. The statement from Miles's teacher, who had noted emotional withdrawal and changes in his classroom behavior during the height of Sabine's deception. It is our position, Gareth concluded, that Mr. Jackson Wynne has maintained consistent parental involvement, demonstrated emotional stability, and protected his children's welfare even amidst personal betrayal. The judge leaned forward. And Mr. Bastien Leclerc is no longer present in the household? He is not, Gareth confirmed. In fact, Mr. Leclerc's husband has filed for divorce citing this affair as one of the causes. Silence held. The judge turned to Sabine. Mrs. Marcellus Wynne, do you have anything to say before I render my ruling? Sabine stood. Her voice wavered. I made mistakes, yes, but I love my children. I was lonely. I wasn't trying to replace Jackson. I was just trying to feel seen. I remained still. There it was again, her reflex to turn betrayal into a monologue about her unmet needs. The judge nodded. Noted. 10 minutes later, the ruling came down. Primary physical custody, awarded to Jackson Wynn. Joint legal custody, with limited visitation for Sabine pending future psychological review. Immediate freeze on Sabine's discretionary spending accounts. Assets under investigation were to be audited and reviewed by court-appointed forensic examiners. Sabine's jaw trembled. The courtroom emptied quietly. Gareth squeezed my shoulder. "You did it." "No," I said. "I just stopped lying to myself." Outside, the sky was clean blue. Miles ran to me, his arms flinging around my waist. "Did it go okay, Dad?" I knelt. "Yeah, bud, it did." Sienna held my hand. "Do we have to move?" "No," I said. "You're staying right where you belong." We walked to the car, no victory laps, just steady ground reclaimed. 2 weeks later, Bastian tried to contact me, an email. A weak apology framed as reflection. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Gareth and blocked the address. Sabine moved out of the penthouse and into a rented apartment in North Bay Village. She asked to see the kids. Gareth advised I allow short, supervised visits. I agreed, but always on my terms. And then, as if karma hadn't had her fill, the art gallery that had once held Sabine's name on its donor wall removed her plaque. Bastian was replaced as curator by a 29-year-old Columbia grad with none of his charm, but all of the actual skill. I didn't have to destroy them. Their own choices did that. What I did do was rebuild. I redid Sienna's bedroom with her, painting the walls a soft seafoam and hanging glow-in-the-dark stars. Miles and I planted a balcony garden. I returned to boxing twice a week, hit the sauna after, and breathed again like a man who remembered who he was before the betrayal. At night, after the kids were asleep, I'd sit with a whiskey, letting the quiet wrap around me, not as loneliness, but peace. Sabine still sent occasional messages, sometimes remorseful, sometimes angry. None of them earned replies. She had chosen her story, and I had rewritten mine. After the court ruling, silence settled over our lives. Not peace, not yet, but a silence thick with aftershocks. The kind of stillness that follows an earthquake. No one moves quickly. Everyone's assessing what broke, what still stands, what can't ever be rebuilt. Sabine kept her distance. The once familiar ping of her messages now came only when she wanted to schedule a visit with the kids. Even those were coldly professional, passed through Gareth or my assistant Dana. She didn't ask to come back. She didn't apologize again. She didn't try to explain what couldn't be salvaged. And I didn't go looking for closure that would never heal anything. Bastian vanished from our lives, as if his whole persona had been an expensive illusion that collapsed under the weight of sunlight. The gallery quietly scrubbed him from the newsletter masthead. His social media went dark. Mutual acquaintances stopped bringing up his name, like it carried contagion. Even the curated brunch crowd in Coral Gables had limits to what they'd excuse once they learned the full truth. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted accountability. The kind that doesn't trend online, but resonates in the core of someone's existence. Quiet, permanent, irrevocable. For the kids, life adjusted faster than I expected. Children are more elastic than adults. Maybe because they haven't yet learned to pretend pain is something you tuck neatly under your shirt collar. Sienna's anxiety eased now that I was the one waking her up for school, packing her lunch, reviewing her assignments at night. Miles became more expressive again, drawing dragons and spaceships and asking endless questions at dinner. Still, there were moments. One evening, after brushing his teeth, Miles looked at me and said, "Mom doesn't smile the same way anymore. It's like she's somewhere else." I nodded, kneeling beside him. Sometimes people get lost in places we can't see, but that's not your job to fix. Is it yours? No, buddy, I tried. But some people don't want to come back. He hugged me hard. I held on longer than he did. Meanwhile, the estate planner Gareth connected me with finalized the updates to the trust. Sabine's access was revoked entirely, and a separate educational fund was created solely for Sienna and Miles. I had spent too long allowing ambiguity to fester. Now every detail had clarity, purpose, boundaries. Then came the email from Bastian's ex-husband, Alaric. Subject, a request for 5 minutes. I nearly deleted it unread. But something about the way it was phrased, restrained, not desperate, gave me pause. We met at a small, nearly empty coffee shop in Midtown. He wore a tailored gray blazer, no tie, clean lines, the kind of man who once likely kept Bastian's chaos tethered to reality. "Thank you for coming," he said, offering a calm handshake. "I'm here out of courtesy, not curiosity." He nodded, accepting the terms. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for Bastian, that's his burden, but for ever being near enough to it that it touched your life." I studied him. Why now? Because I found a notebook. His, after everything. And in it were plans. For both of you. For how he'd leverage the affair into gallery prominence, break your public image slowly. He was trying to replace you, not just romantically but professionally, socially. I exhaled, steady. I already knew. I just didn't need the proof. He slid a page across the table, typed, printed, circled in red. Bastian's voice came through even the font. Arrogant, strategic, cruel. "I submitted this to my divorce counsel," Alaric said, "but I thought you should have a copy." I folded it neatly and pocketed it. "Thank you." "One more thing," Alaric said, his voice quieter now. "There was a moment, maybe a year ago, when Sabine reached out to me. She said she was feeling overwhelmed, confused. I thought it was benign at first, like maybe she was trying to fix something. But she asked me not to tell Bastian, which, in hindsight, tells me she knew then how toxic he was. She just let herself fall anyway. It landed heavier than I expected. Sabine had known. She hadn't stumbled blindly into deception. She'd tiptoed toward it fully aware of what it could cost. "She wasn't manipulated," I said. "No," Alaric agreed. "She just wanted to believe the manipulation was love." I left the coffee shop not angry, not satisfied, but whole. I didn't need further punishment for them. I had my life back, and I had plans. The children and I moved into a new home by the end of May, a 4-bedroom penthouse in Brickell with wraparound views and a small library room where I set up a reading nook for Sienna and a digital telescope for Miles. The old place had too many ghosts, too many curated lies. The kids settled in quickly. They even began sleeping through the night again. Sabine, during her limited visitations, said little about the change. She came and went like someone attending a work obligation. But one evening, after returning the kids, she lingered in the foyer. "I saw the nursery," she said quietly. "You kept the moon nightlight. It helps Miles sleep." She hesitated. "He asked me if you still loved me." I looked her in the eye. "What did you say?" I told him. "I don't think love works like that anymore." I nodded. "It doesn't." She stepped back toward the door, then turned again. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said honestly. "But I don't miss you." Tears rimmed her eyes. She didn't try to explain, just walked away. And that was maybe the most honest thing she'd done in 2 years. A month later, I took the kids on a road trip. Nothing elaborate, just me, them, a rented Escalade, and the open road to Asheville, North Carolina. We stayed in a cabin with no Wi-Fi, cooked our own meals, hiked trails until Sienna's legs gave out and I had to carry her back down the hill on my shoulders. It was the first time I laughed freely in months. The kind of laugh that doesn't just escape your chest, but rebuilds the space it came from. And it was there, by a fire pit under the stars, that Sienna asked, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" "Yes," I said. "We already are." I didn't need to believe it was destiny or fate. It was just choice. Repeated, steady, quiet choices toward presence, honesty, love. That night, I deleted the last backup file I had of Sabine's messages, the ones I'd kept not for court, but for pain. And for proof, for that twisted sense of validation that says, you didn't imagine it. But I didn't need them anymore. She'd already written herself out of the future. When we returned to Miami, life resumed, but in an entirely new rhythm. My design firm offered me a long-delayed creative directorship, and I accepted. I launched a mentorship program in Sienna's name, offering free studio space and grants to underprivileged youth interested in design and architecture. Sabine never attended the gala that marked the program's launch. She sent a polite RSVP decline. But Alaric came. So did Marta. Gareth delivered the opening remarks. After the event, Miles tugged on my suit jacket. "Dad?" "Yeah? I think Mom would have liked it." "Maybe," I said. "But this wasn't for her." He nodded, then added, "I like it better when it's just us." "Me too, son. Me too." And in that moment, standing on the rooftop under string lights with both my children beside me, I felt it. Not just closure, but contentment. Not revenge, but restoration. The traitors weren't punished by me. They were punished by their own emptiness. And I was whole. I didn't expect Gareth to call late on a Wednesday evening. He never did unless it was urgent or personal, and this time it was both. I was prepping Miles for bed, brushing dried acrylic paint off his hands after he'd spent the afternoon recreating the Miami skyline with finger paints. The phone buzzed on the kitchen island just as I turned off the lights in the hallway. "Something's happened," Gareth said, his voice low and precise. "With Bastian." I didn't flinch. "He's being indicted," Gareth continued, "for embezzlement, laundering through gallery donations, falsifying appraisals on works he sold to donors. The indictment includes dates that overlap with your timeline." I closed my eyes. "Of course. Does this affect me legally?" "No," Gareth said, reassuringly. "You were never named, nor involved, but there's media interest. Your name might surface in the social side of the narrative. I wanted you to be ready." I'd long moved past worrying about image, but for the sake of my kids, it mattered. My firm had just launched a 6-month mentorship campaign. My own name had been restored in industry circles with careful precision. I wasn't going to let the dirt from Bastian's collapse stain the ground I'd just rebuilt. Still, the news stirred something deep in me. Not satisfaction, not vengeance, more like a final click. The last bolt falling into place to secure the door behind him. 2 days later, a reporter reached out requesting comment. I declined. That same night, I received an anonymous package. Inside, a manila envelope with neatly clipped articles and photos. Bastian at fundraisers. Bastian with donors. Bastian in his apartment, with Sabine on his balcony, time-stamped months before I'd learned the truth. It wasn't the affair that landed hardest. It was the laugh. Her face turned toward him in that still frame, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, as if she hadn't simply chosen him. She'd chosen to come alive again, just not with me. That night, I sat in the dark with the photos spread across the floor. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was just documenting, cataloging the ruins before filing them away forever. The kids stayed with Marta that weekend, her idea, not Sabine's. She'd noticed Sienna was restless again and offered to take them to the coast for a few days. I welcomed the quiet, not because I needed solitude, but because I needed to think clearly. I spent the time reorganizing the home, donating old things, rearranging bookshelves, updating the children's bedroom decor. I found one of Sabine's old perfume bottles in the bathroom drawer, nearly empty, forgotten. I sprayed it once into the air and then threw it away. Her scent didn't belong here anymore. Sunday evening, I picked up Sienna and Miles from Marta's place. Sienna chatted about the pelicans. Miles showed me a sand dollar in a plastic Ziploc bag. I buckled them in and started the drive home. At the next red light, Miles spoke from the back seat. "Dad, why does Bastian steal?" I glanced at the rearview mirror. "What do you mean, Bud?" "I heard Aunt Marta say he took things that weren't his." Sienna looked over at him with a frown. "He's in trouble. Big trouble." I answered carefully. Sometimes people who seem like they have everything still want more, and instead of working for it, they take shortcuts. But shortcuts often come with big consequences. "Will he go to jail?" "Yes," I said honestly. "Good," Sienna muttered. "He made Mom weird." There it was again. That word, weird. The unspoken transformation they'd observed but couldn't fully articulate. Sabine had become someone else in their eyes. Someone inconsistent, slippery, emotionally unavailable. I didn't respond. Some truths reveal themselves best in silence. That following Thursday, Sabine showed up unannounced at my office. Dana buzzed in, her voice neutral. "She says it's important. Should I send her away?" I hesitated. Then, "Give me 2 minutes, then send her in." Sabine entered in a cream blazer and soft gray slacks, looking polished but drawn. There was a tension around her mouth that hadn't been there before. Her movements were tight, controlled. "I won't stay long," she said, clutching her phone in one hand like a shield. I didn't know Bastian was doing any of that. I swear." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What are you worried, I think? That I was part of it? That I knowingly helped him?" Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't. I believed her, not because she said it, but because Sabine had always been the kind of person who got seduced by illusions, not spreadsheets. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said, "and no one else is either." She exhaled, relief softening her expression. "They've subpoenaed his emails. Mine too, from our shared accounts. I'm cooperating fully, but I feel like I'm unraveling. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't know who else to tell." That landed heavier than I expected. "I'm not your refuge anymore," I said gently. "That ended a long time ago." "I know." She wiped under her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't come here to ask anything of you. Just to say, I realize what I gave up. I see it now." I nodded slowly. "You see it, but you can't get it back." She stood, hesitating at the threshold. "I've been writing a letter. For the kids. Not to make excuses, just to explain my side. Should I give it to them? Read it again in 6 months. If it still feels necessary, I won't stop you." She left without another word. This time, I didn't watch her go. Weeks passed. Bastian's indictment turned into arraignment. Alaric released a public statement distancing himself from all past associations with the gallery. Several donors sued for fraud. Bastian pled not guilty. Of course he did. But the evidence was staggering. Paintings triple appraised, donors misled, inventory hidden. His charm had become his weapon. But weapons have fingerprints. Sabine wasn't publicly named, but her social reputation took a hit. Invitations dried up. She withdrew from a board seat on a local charity. Rumors swirled. The kids asked fewer questions now. They didn't mention Bastian. Sabine remained cordial, if distant. Parenting became less of a negotiation and more of a structure. One Saturday afternoon, As I was trimming the hedges on the terrace, Sienna brought me her sketch pad. She'd drawn our new house, each floor detailed, windows glowing yellow. "You like it here, huh?" I asked. She nodded. "It feels like you. Not like Mommy." I looked at the drawing again. In the upper window, she'd drawn a small figure, a man at a desk. Me. Underneath, she'd written, "Home is where Dad is." That night, I stared at the ceiling long after the kids fell asleep. All the headlines, court dates, past conversations, they faded under that one truth. Home wasn't defined by glass and steel or curated art or perfect meals. It was presence. It was honesty. It was doing the hard thing over and over again. I had rebuilt not just a life, but a center, one they could orbit around safely, and I would never let it shatter again. The next morning, I sat down and drafted an article, a personal piece, not about Bastian, not even about Sabine, but about resilience, fatherhood, and finding clarity after betrayal. I submitted it to a major digital magazine under the title, "After the Collapse, What I Found Beneath the Ruins." It went viral within days, not because it was angry, but because it was quiet, measured, unapologetically honest. I received thousands of messages, from divorced fathers, betrayed husbands, even women who realized too late the damage their silence had done. And one email stood out, from a publisher. "We're building a series on modern fatherhood, post-betrayal healing, and masculine integrity. Your voice could anchor it." It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was legacy. I printed out the email and showed it to Sienna. "Do you think I should write a book?" I asked. She grinned. "Only if there's a chapter about how you make the best pancakes." Deal. The courtroom was warmer than expected, an odd thing to notice when every nerve in my body was coiled tight like a piano string. I'd sat in many courtrooms before, zoning meetings, corporate liability arbitrations, even a small claims settlement during a renovation mishap years ago. But this felt different. This wasn't about property lines or budgets. This was about truth, about betrayal, about protecting my children from the slow rot of manipulation that had taken root in their mother and her lover. Sabine sat 2 rows behind Bastian, her posture folded in on itself. She wore a navy blouse, pearl earrings, and no makeup. That used to be the Sabine I'd known, a woman who held her image like armor. But this version of her looked stripped down, like the wind had sandblasted the varnish off her. She never looked back at me. Bastian, on the other hand, wore arrogance like cologne, trimmed beard, cuffed charcoal blazer, the kind of look meant to seduce a jury. He greeted his lawyer with a grin as if this were just another art auction preview, but I knew that look now. That smirk was a wall. And today, we'd punch through it. My attorney, Gareth, sat beside me, calm as always, his notes precise. What mattered today wasn't the full criminal trial. That was ongoing. What mattered now was the civil custody hearing and the accompanying restraining order I was filing against Sabine, not out of revenge, but for safety. I had photos, texts, school counselor statements, audio recordings from nights when Sienna cried herself to sleep in the hallway because her mother and Bastian were too drunk to notice she hadn't eaten. Sabine's parental instability wasn't a theory anymore. It was documented, it was real, and it was going to be seen. The judge, a stern woman in her early 60s with a clipped voice and perceptive eyes, started by reviewing the submitted evidence. She turned to Sabine. "You've been served a petition to reduce and supervise your custody. Do you wish to respond before we proceed?" Sabine stood slowly. Her voice trembled. "Your Honor, I made mistakes." "I did. But I never stopped loving my children. I never harmed them." Gareth stood. "Your Honor, the issue isn't just neglect. It's pattern and consequence." Ms. Everly moved in with Mr. Rousseau, a man under criminal indictment for fraud and coercive behavior during critical developmental months of her children's lives. My client has documented multiple instances where the children were left unattended, emotionally distressed, and in one case, injured without proper medical attention. The judge flipped through the file. The hospital report confirms a dislocated elbow sustained by the younger child. Miles, Ms. Everly, can you explain why it took over 6 hours to bring the child in? Sabine fumbled for words. I didn't realize how bad it was. Bastian said it was probably just a bruise. I closed my eyes. That moment, Miles screaming in pain, me racing to the emergency room after Marta called because Sabine was unreachable. It played in my mind like a siren. It wasn't a moment of misunderstanding. It was a moment of failure. And it could never happen again. The judge tapped her pen. And Mr. Rousseau? Has he had any direct interactions with the children during this time? Gareth replied, yes, several. And we have statements from a neighbor and nanny indicating he once yelled aggressively at Sienna for leaving a light on. There is also an audio clip where he refers to the children as weights Sabine needs to drop if she ever wants to be free. Sabine's face crumpled slightly, like a paper mask dipped in water. I didn't know he said that, she whispered. But she did. She just hadn't wanted to admit it then. After the hearing recessed for deliberation, I stepped outside into the shaded corridor and breathed in slowly. Marta joined me. They're going to rule in your favor, she said quietly. I know, but it still feels like a funeral. Maybe it is, she said. The burial of who she used to be. That struck deeper than I expected. Sabine had once been my partner in everything. Creative projects, parenting, hosting, even quiet Sunday evenings when we'd do crosswords over chamomile tea. We had built a world, but she'd burned it down and left the ashes in my hands. Back inside, the ruling came swiftly. Effective immediately, Mr. Jackson Pierce will assume full physical and legal custody of the children. Ms. Sabine Everly will have supervised visitation rights pending evaluation from a family therapist. Contact with Mr. Rousseau is prohibited during visitations, and any breach will result in termination of access. The gavel fell. Sabine bowed her head and began to cry silently. Bastian stood up and walked out before the judge even left the bench. Not a word, not a glance, not even to Sabine. That was the final twist. When everything crumbled, Bastian proved himself exactly what he always was, performative loyalty with no substance underneath. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but Gareth waved them off. Marta took the kids from school while I stayed behind for final paperwork. As I exited the side door, I saw Sabine sitting on a bench alone, staring at her palms. I lost them, she said when I passed. I lost everything. You lost them a long time ago, I said gently. Today just made it official. She looked up, eyes red. Will they ever forgive me? I don't know, I said. But if you want even a chance, don't try to force it. Let them come to you when they're ready, if they ever are. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin envelope. I finished the letter. I won't send it now. But keep it? I took it. Not for her. But maybe someday, when Sienna was old enough to read between the lines and Miles needed to understand the confusion of his early years, it would serve a purpose. That night, I sat with the kids on the rooftop terrace. Sienna leaned against me, eyes closed, while Miles played with a small telescope. Can we stay here forever? Sienna asked. Yes, I said. This is home now. They'd both been through too much. Uprooted. Confused. Hurt by the very people meant to protect them. But here, on this terrace above the Miami skyline, I could offer them something else. Stability. Peace. Presence. The publisher who'd reached out weeks ago called again. We read the new article, the one about the hearing. You've got a voice people trust. This isn't just a story. It's a movement. We signed the contract within days. The book advance alone would fund the kids' future. But more than that, it gave shape to something larger than our private pain. I titled the book, Presence Over Performance, A Father's Reclamation. The foreword read, "This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are when the world tries to reduce you to silence." A month later, Bastian was formally convicted, sentenced to 5 years, fined millions. His gallery was dismantled. His name became a whisper in collector circles, a cautionary tale of arrogance and fraud wrapped in couture suits and gallery lighting. Sabine faded from public life. She moved to a small rental in Coral Gables and began seeing a therapist. She wrote me once, not about the kids, not to beg or manipulate, but just to say, "Thank you for not turning them against me." I didn't reply. The best redemption isn't in words. It's in actions sustained across time. And that wasn't mine to give. But I did give my children something no one else had offered them in those chaotic years. A father who stayed, who showed up, who rebuilt without venom or vanity. On the day the book launched, I took Sienna and Miles to a small park by the marina. We watched the boats drift in and out of the bay, and I read them the dedication. For Sienna and Miles, who taught me that presence speaks louder than any apology. They didn't fully understand it. Not yet. But someday, they would. It was the first morning in months that I hadn't woken up with a lump of dread in my chest. No court date circled in red on the calendar. No late-night calls from my attorney. No veiled threats from Sabine's camp about dragging things out or reconsidering terms. It was just quiet, clean, even, and real. I stood at the kitchen counter of the new house we'd finally moved into, a modern townhome tucked in a gated community near Coral Way, not the kind of place to flaunt wealth, but designed for peace. Sienna's backpack lay open on the bar stool, a glittery charm shaped like a moon dangling from the zipper. Miles was still asleep upstairs, his favorite dinosaur plushie tucked under his arm, breathing easy. That peace had cost me everything: marriage, friendships, years of reputation. But it had also rebuilt something stronger. I checked the front porch camera. A delivery had arrived. I stepped out, picked up the small package, and opened it while sunlight filtered over the tile. Inside, beneath layers of brown paper, was a slim, hardcover copy of my book, Presence Over Performance. It wasn't just a printed memoir. It was a declaration, a slow-burning anthem for men who had stayed quiet for too long. I held it in my hands and let out a long breath. When the publisher called weeks ago to confirm early sales numbers, I didn't react much. I didn't write it for profit. I wrote it because something inside me had been buried under years of performing as the perfect husband, the agreeable business partner, the calm provider. The betrayal didn't just destroy my family. It cracked open something honest. The book gave me my voice back, and maybe it would do the same for others. "Dad?" Sienna appeared in the hallway, rubbing one eye. "Morning, sweetheart." She patted over and wrapped her arms around me without saying anything. It had become her habit lately, not in a clinging way, more like a grounding ritual, a check-in. That was the thing about kids. They didn't always ask the questions directly, but their bodies spoke in gestures, in silences, in the way they scanned your face for signals. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the book. I handed it to her. "That's our story. Yours too." She opened the cover and smiled. "You wrote about us?" "I wrote for you," I said, "so that someday, if the world ever tries to convince you that silence is strength, you'll know better." She nodded, thoughtful. "Will Mom read it?" I paused. "Maybe. Maybe not. I think she should." There was no anger in her voice. No resentment. Just a statement of fact, like the weather. The supervised visits Sabine now had once a month were quiet, civil. I never interfered, but I stayed within legal range, and Marta always monitored discreetly from a distance. Sabine didn't bring up Bastian anymore. From what Gareth told me, she hadn't spoken to him since his sentencing. After Bastian's conviction, 5 years federal time, with 3 additional years of probation and restitution penalties, his social world evaporated. The gallery shut down. Investors sued him for misrepresentation and embezzlement. Articles flooded the Miami art scene blogs with headlines like, "The Fall of Rousseau, Scandal Behind the Canvas." Even Alaric, once a frequent dinner guest in our home, wrote a bitter op-ed distancing himself from the man he'd once praised as visionary. He said Bastian fooled us all. But I wasn't fooled. Not in the end. Not when it mattered. And Sabine, well, she was back to teaching occasional weekend classes at a community center. Not glamorous, not spotlight-worthy, but in a strange way, maybe good for her. The kind of humility she never allowed herself while we were married now seemed stitched into her every movement. She had asked, once, carefully, if the children might ever spend a weekend with her again. I hadn't answered right away. I just said, "Show me. Not once. Not for a month. Over time. Show me you're building something they can stand on. Then we'll talk." And she nodded. That, more than any court order, told me she understood this wasn't about her rights. It was about trust. Weeks passed. The book made waves, interviews, podcast features, an invite to speak at a father's mental health summit in San Francisco. I turned down most of it, too much noise, not enough meaning, but I did agree to one event in Miami. It felt right to bring the message home. I stood behind the stage curtain in a fitted navy suit, microphone clipped to my lapel, and peeked out at the audience. Sienna and Miles sat in the front row, flanked by Marta and Gareth. My daughter gave me a double thumbs up. The event organizer introduced me as a father who turned silence into story and betrayal into power. I didn't feel powerful. I felt present. When I stepped onto the stage, I didn't start with stats or thanks. I started with truth. I didn't want revenge, I told the crowd. I wanted clarity. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I wanted to stop being erased. When you've been cheated on, lied to, and abandoned, not just by a spouse, but by a system that tells men to be stoic and disappear, you start to believe the only thing left to do is walk away. But I didn't walk away. I stayed. For my children, for myself. And I rebuilt. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. The crowd didn't erupt in applause. They didn't need to. They leaned in, breath quiet, faces lit with the kind of empathy that doesn't need sound. Afterward, a man in his 50s approached me with tears in his eyes. "My wife left me 2 years ago, took our son across the country. Your story gave me hope I didn't know I needed." I clasped his hand. "Don't disappear. They'll try to make you feel invisible. Show up anyway." That became my quiet mantra. Show up anyway. Later that night, as the kids slept and the house finally hushed, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the envelope Sabine had handed me outside the courthouse months ago. I'd never opened it. I unfolded the letter carefully. "Jackson, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I even deserve to ask. I stopped seeing you a long time ago, even before the affair. I think I needed someone to validate the version of me I thought I wanted to become, and I used you as the mirror to bounce it off of. That was cruel. Bastian didn't ruin me. I chose to walk with him into that chaos. I thought power and desire would fix what was missing. But I was what was missing. I hope someday our children can love me again. And if they do, it'll be because of you. Because you didn't fill them with hate. Thank you for still being the better parent, even when I didn't deserve it. Sabine." I read the letter twice, not because it moved me, but because it closed a door, A door I hadn't realized still creaked open in my mind from time to time. I folded it back into the envelope, placed it in the box with my court transcripts, and returned it to the drawer. Then I turned out the light. 1 year later, Sienna turned 13. A rooftop birthday, just like she wanted. String lights, soft jazz, and mocktails in tall glasses with sugared rims. Miles wore a clip-on bow tie and narrated the entire party like a game show host. Sabine attended, not as a guest of honor, but as a quiet, respectful presence. She stayed on the periphery, brought Sienna a small, handmade gift, a sketchbook filled with blank pages and a note that said, "For new beginnings." Sienna hugged her politely. Miles played it cool. There were no grand reconciliations, no sudden family reunion, but there was space. And sometimes space was the best gift anyone could give. As dusk fell and the Miami skyline blinked awake with lights, I stood at the balcony railing, drink in hand, and listened to my daughter laugh. Not perform, not fake it, just laugh. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't need to. I felt steady. And in a world that once tried to shake everything loose, steady was the most radical thing I could be. In life, betrayal rarely announces itself with a crash. It slips in quietly, wearing a familiar face. And when the world we've built begins to crack, we are faced with a choice: to become smaller in the aftermath, or to expand into the space left behind. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation, about the quiet strength it takes to stay present when everything is pulling you to disappear. It's about standing still in the storm, not to fight it, but to remain whole through it. Healing isn't loud, dignity doesn't shout, and the real power lies not in the destruction of others, but in the quiet rebuilding of self. Peace doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from proving to yourself that you were always right to value love, truth, and presence. For anyone walking through ashes, the fire may have taken much, but it didn't take you. And that's where your new life begins. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that just might speak to your heart. Until next time.